My name is David Henderson. I'm 34 years old, and I live in a quiet, tree-lined suburb just outside of Kansas City, Missouri. I'm a pretty ordinary person, all things considered. I work from home as a freelance graphic designer, which means my life is a cycle of deadlines, client calls, and the constant hum of my computer. I'm not the kind of guy who stands out in a crowd, and I'm definitely not the center of attention at parties. Most evenings, I wrap up my work, make myself some dinner, maybe stream a show or get lost in a book, and then turn in for the night. My life isn't what you'd call thrilling. I've been in this same modest house for about 6 years now. My neighbors and I are on friendly terms. We exchange waves when I'm getting the mail and they're pulling out of their driveways, but that's the extent of it. I've always appreciated the tranquility and the predictability of it all. At least I used to until everything changed a few weeks ago. The house directly next to mine belongs to Claire Miller. She's 38, with a kind of understated elegance, striking blue eyes that seem to hold a world of thoughts, and a quiet grace that was hard to ignore. She's married to Richard, a man who must be in his early 50s, a successful executive of some kind. Over the years, we'd shared the usual polite greetings across the lawn, but I never got to know them on any real level. They were private people. Richard always seemed preoccupied, a man perpetually on his way to a more important destination, his phone often pressed to his ear. Claire, however, possessed a serene quality that could make a brief, 10-second exchange feel meaningful. Her presence had a stillness that lingered long after she'd gone inside. Last Tuesday night, something happened that I couldn't shake. It was late, close to midnight, and I was in my studio finishing up a project when I saw a flicker of movement outside my window. I looked out and saw Claire, standing motionless on her front lawn. She was wearing a simple white robe, her arms wrapped around her waist, her bare feet lost in the dark grass. The street was silent. Bathed in the cool, artificial glow of the streetlights, she just stood there, staring up at the sky. It was strange and deeply unsettling. After watching for a minute, a knot of concern tightening in my chest, I decided I had to go out there. I slipped on my shoes, walked out my front door, and crossed the small patch of lawn that separated our properties. "Claire?" I called out softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned her head slowly, her face pale in the dim light. Her eyes were glassy, and when she spoke, her voice was a fragile whisper. "I just needed to breathe," she said, a faint tremor in her words. The house. It just felt so small. Of course I didn't press her. I just stood there with her for a moment in the cool night air. I offered to get her a jacket or a cup of tea, but she just shook her head. After a long, shared silence under the stars, she gave a weak smile and said she should go back in. I watched her walk back to her front door and disappear inside, leaving me with a profound sense of unease. The following afternoon, just as I was trying to focus on a new design layout, there was a knock on my door. I was in my usual work-from-home attire, a faded t-shirt and comfortable shorts. When I opened it, it was Claire. She was dressed in a simple sundress, her hair pulled back loosely, but her eyes were still shadowed with exhaustion. She was holding a small, empty mug in her hands, as if she'd forgotten she was even carrying it. "Hi, David," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I hope this isn't a bother, but could I come in for a minute?" I immediately welcomed her inside, guiding her toward the living room sofa and taking the empty mug from her hand. I offered to make her some fresh tea, and she nodded without a word. I didn't ask any questions. I sensed she would speak when she was ready. She sat on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her gaze fixed on the steam curling up from the new cup I placed in front of her. A heavy silence settled between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. After what felt like a long time, she finally broke it. "It's too loud in my own head," she whispered, her voice cracking slightly. "I thought I could manage it, but I don't want to be by myself right now." I simply nodded, telling her she didn't need to offer any explanation. We sat there for a while longer, sipping our tea, letting the quiet of my home provide a buffer against whatever was happening in hers. The quiet wasn't awkward. In fact, it felt strangely comforting. After a while, she began to talk, the words spilling out slowly at first, then with more conviction. She spoke about Richard, about how their life wasn't what it appeared to be from the outside. She described how, over the last few years, a chasm had grown between them, how she often felt more like a part of the household staff than a wife. She wasn't weeping or hysterical. It was more like she was allowing a painful truth to seep out, drop by drop, like a slow, steady leak. She eventually looked at me, her blue eyes clear and direct. "I know this must sound terrible," she said, "but sometimes I feel like I've been grieving this marriage for years. It's like I lost the man I married long before I lost the connection." I found myself at a loss for words, so I remained quiet, just offering a nod of understanding. That seemed to be all she needed, not advice, not solutions, just a witness. Before she finally stood to leave, her eyes scanned my living room, taking in the slightly cluttered bookshelves and the comfortable worn-in armchair. A faint smile touched her lips. "It feels calm in here," she remarked softly. And then she was gone, walking back across the lawn to her own pristine, empty house. But something fundamental had shifted between us. The morning after Claire's first visit, my ability to concentrate was completely gone. I had a dozen emails that needed responses, a branding guide to finalize, and a client presentation due by the end of the week. But my thoughts kept returning to her. I saw her sitting on my couch clutching that teacup as if it were a lifeline, the only thing anchoring her to the present moment. I couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was, but the raw honesty in her voice, the vulnerability she had shown, had gotten under my skin. It wasn't an unwelcome feeling, just a persistent one that I couldn't shake. By midday, I hadn't accomplished anything productive and hadn't even thought about food. I was staring blankly at a color palette on my screen when I heard another knock at the door. I opened it to find her standing there again. This time there was no sundress, no pretense. She was wearing jeans, a simple t-shirt, and sneakers, with a faded gray hoodie that looked soft and well-loved draped over her shoulders. She held 2 brown paper bags from a little sandwich shop down the street. "I had a feeling you might forget to eat," she said, offering a small, hesitant smile. "I almost did too. I brought us lunch, if that's okay." She didn't wait for my confirmation, simply stepping past me into the house as if it were the most natural thing in the world, and somehow it felt that way. It felt right. We decided to eat out on my back deck. The sky was overcast and the air was thick with the promise of rain, but it was cool and refreshing. She handed me a roast beef sandwich, and we both sat there, quietly unwrapping our food. We didn't say anything at first, and I didn't try to force conversation. She took small, deliberate bites, her gaze fixed on the dense line of oak trees that bordered my backyard, as if she were mentally 1,000 miles away. After a few minutes, she broke the comfortable silence. "It's so strange," she began, her voice low and contemplative. "I always thought if I ever reached this point, I'd be a wreck. I'd be crying, screaming, throwing things, but instead I just feel hollow, like I'm an actress playing a part in a life that isn't mine." I glanced over at her, but she kept her eyes trained on the trees, not looking at me. "I've been carrying this weight in my chest for so long, David, even when Richard is home. It's like the sadness started years ago when we stopped connecting, when he stopped really looking at me." I let her speak, giving her the space to unload the thoughts she'd clearly been holding inside. I just sat and listened. She let out a long sigh before continuing. "We used to have so much fun. I truly loved him. But then his career became everything. The promotions, the business trips, the late nights at the office. I started having dinner by myself even on the nights he was home. We'd be in the same bed, but there might as well have been an ocean between us." She finally turned to face me, her eyes a little misty, but her gaze unwavering. "Have you ever had the feeling that you're slowly becoming invisible in your own house?" I gave a slow nod, not because I had experienced that exact situation, but because I understood the profound loneliness she was describing. I think most people do, in one way or another. A moment passed, and then she let out a soft, almost self-conscious laugh. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to unload all of this on you. I don't have anyone else to talk to about it. You have nothing to apologize for, I said sincerely. Sometimes you just need someone to listen. She gave me a look that was a mixture of gratitude and perhaps a little surprise. For the next hour we talked, but not about Richard or her marriage anymore. We shifted to lighter things. Our favorite terrible movies, the best coffee shops in the city, the time she tried to bake a ridiculously complex cake that ended up looking like a melted sculpture. I told her about a time early in my career when I accidentally sent a client a draft with a massive, embarrassing typo in the headline. She laughed at that, a genuine, full-throated laugh. And for that brief moment, she looked like a person who hadn't forgotten what joy felt like. At one point as we were talking, I felt her hand brush against mine on the small patio table. It rested there for a beat, a silent acknowledgement that passed between us before she gently pulled it away. Her expression shifted, a quick flash of something, guilt maybe, or just confusion. I should probably go, she said abruptly, pushing her chair back and standing up. This is probably not right. I don't want you to get the wrong idea or think I'm just using you as an escape. I stood up as well. You're not, I said, and I meant it completely. She paused at the door leading back inside. I just really didn't want to be alone today. I nodded. Then don't be. Anytime you need to talk or just sit in silence, my door is open. A heavy, unspoken understanding hung in the air between us. It was clear that neither of us wanted to put a name to what was happening, but we both felt it, a shift in our dynamic, a warmth and a closeness that neither of us had anticipated. She gave a slow nod. Thank you, David. Really. With that, she stepped outside and walked across the grass back to her house. I watched her go, her arms crossed over her chest as a breeze caught her hair. Something had definitely changed. I couldn't explain it, but I knew we had crossed some invisible boundary. Nothing physical had happened, no embrace, no kiss, but an unspoken connection had been forged between us, and I had a feeling it wasn't going to disappear. The next day began under a blanket of gray clouds. A heavy stillness hung in the air, the kind that often precedes a summer downpour. I was sitting at my kitchen table, a lukewarm mug of coffee in my hands, attempting to sort through my inbox, but my focus was shot. My thoughts kept drifting, circling back to Claire. It wasn't just that she had come over again. It was the atmosphere she brought with her, the way her presence lingered in my quiet house long after she'd left. I couldn't stop replaying her words, or the way she'd looked at me with that complicated mixture of loss and a nascent, surprising familiarity. And then there was that fleeting moment on the deck, the brief touch of her hand against mine, that had imprinted itself on my mind with the weight of something much more significant. Sometime after lunch, I found myself walking to the window that overlooked her backyard. I told myself I wasn't looking for her, that I was just stretching my legs, but my eyes immediately found her. She was standing near the edge of her perfectly manicured patio, her arms wrapped tightly around her midsection as if she were physically trying to hold herself together. She looked so small and uncertain, like someone teetering on the brink of a decision they weren't sure they were ready to make. 10 minutes went by, then 15, and then, just as I'd anticipated, came the soft knock on my door. I knew it was her before I even turned the knob. Claire stood on my porch in a simple navy blue sweater that drooped slightly off one shoulder and a pair of dark leggings. She wore no makeup, no jewelry. It was just her. She looked utterly drained, but her eyes held a quiet intensity, as though she'd been wrestling with a monumental thought. "Can I please come in?" she asked, her voice soft. "Of course," I replied, stepping back without a second thought. She walked past me into the living room, her movements slower and more deliberate than the day before, as if she were questioning her own right to be there. I didn't say anything to rush her. I just stood for a moment watching her as her eyes scanned the room, as if searching for an answer she couldn't find in her own home. I wasn't going to come over. she admitted, after a moment of silence. I've been pacing back and forth for the last hour, but I couldn't think of anywhere else to go. You don't ever need a reason, I said gently. Claire moved toward the couch and curled up on one end, tucking her feet beneath her like someone trying to make themselves as small as possible. I took the armchair across from her, wanting to give her space. The room was quiet for a while, filled only by the distant hum of a lawnmower down the street and the steady ticking of my old wall clock. I don't know how to be by myself, she said at last, her voice barely a whisper. I went straight from my parents' house to living with Richard. I've never known anything else. There was always someone else there. And now, it's just me in that big, quiet house. I nodded slowly, understanding the disorientation she must be feeling. It's a huge adjustment, she continued, exhaling a shaky breath. But the thing is, I've felt alone for years, even when he was there. It's like I was mourning the end of our relationship long before it was actually over. Her words carried a heavy weight, and I knew they weren't spoken lightly. I leaned forward in my chair, resting my forearms on my knees. That's a special kind of loneliness, I said quietly. When someone is physically present but emotionally a million miles away. She looked at me then, her gaze direct and searching. Her voice dropped even lower. Do you think I'm a bad person for being here? For not feeling guilty about talking to you like this? I took a moment before answering, wanting to choose my words with care. No, I said firmly. I don't think there's a rule book for connection or for feeling trapped. Sometimes people show up in our lives exactly when we need them to. That doesn't make it wrong. Her expression softened, as if she had been holding her breath, waiting for my judgment. I just never expected to feel a pull towards someone else right now, she whispered, more to herself than to me. Neither did I admitted honestly. She looked down at her hands, nervously fiddling with the hem of her sweater. I can't go back there tonight, not because I'm trying to run away from anything, but because I don't think I can stand to be inside those four walls again. I feel like I'm going to suffocate. I could hear the raw truth in her voice. It wasn't melodrama or an exaggeration. It was a woman who had reached the absolute limit of what she could endure on her own. You don't have to explain, I said softly. If you need a place where you can just breathe, you can have the guest room. Claire blinked rapidly, a shimmer of unshed tears in her eyes. I didn't think you'd say that. You're not alone in this, Claire. She nodded slowly, and for the first time all day, the faintest hint of a smile touched her lips. Later that evening, I pulled fresh sheets and a clean blanket from the linen closet and made up the bed in the spare room, while she sat quietly in the living room. Sipping a cup of chamomile tea I'd made for her, we didn't talk much more. The silence between us felt easy and natural, a comfortable quiet that was more soothing than any words could be. Before she went to her room for the night, she approached me again, her movements calm and deliberate. Thank you, David, she said softly, for all of this, for not bombarding me with questions, for making me feel like a person again. And then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. It wasn't a romantic gesture, nor was it rushed. It was simply human. Her head rested against my shoulder, and I held her, my arms wrapped around her, offering steady, silent support. It was the kind of embrace you don't easily forget. When we finally pulled apart, she whispered, "Good night," and then she turned and disappeared down the short hallway to the guest room. I stood there for a long time, alone in the quiet of my house, the warmth of her hug still lingering on my skin. And I realized with a startling clarity that my predictable life had been irrevocably altered. I didn't get much sleep that night. It wasn't because anything had happened, it hadn't, but because I was acutely aware of everything. I was aware of Claire, a married woman sleeping in the room just down the hall. I was aware of the immense weight she was carrying, and I was aware that this situation had moved far beyond a neighbor simply needing a place to crash for the night. This was a woman on the verge of changing her entire life, who, for reasons she probably didn't fully grasp herself, had chosen to seek refuge in my home. The walls of my house seemed thinner. Every creak of the floorboards amplified, and my thoughts refused to settle down. I kept replaying the hug we had shared. It wasn't passionate or dramatic. It was profoundly human and honest. It was the kind of hug you remember not for what it might lead to, but for how deeply necessary it felt in that moment for both of us. When the first hints of dawn finally began to streak the sky, I gave up on sleep and got out of bed. The house was completely silent. I moved through it slowly, careful not to make any noise that might wake her. I started a pot of coffee and stood by the kitchen window, cupping the warm mug in both hands, watching as the soft morning light washed over the fence in my backyard. About 20 minutes later, I heard the soft, cautious sound of her footsteps in the hallway, as if she were afraid of intruding. She appeared in the doorway to the kitchen, wrapped in the light gray blanket from the guest room. Her hair was tousled from sleep, and her expression was calm but deeply tired. She was still beautiful, but in a different way now, more raw, more real. "Morning," she said quietly. "Hey," I replied with a small, reassuring smile. "Coffee's ready." She nodded, stepping further into the kitchen to accept the mug I offered her. We stood there for a while in companionable silence, just sipping our coffee. There was something about the quiet between us that wasn't empty or awkward. It was restorative. Eventually, she sat down at my small kitchen table, pulling the blanket more tightly around her shoulders. She stared out the window for a long moment before speaking. "I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing," she confessed. I took the seat across from her. "I don't think you're supposed to, Claire. You're just figuring things out 1 minute at a time. Right now, that's more than enough." She nodded slowly, processing my words. "I keep thinking about how it felt yesterday, just sitting here talking, being able to breathe. For a few hours, it felt like I got a tiny piece of myself back." Then she looked directly at me, her blue eyes holding a profound depth that went beyond romance or confusion. "Richard and we haven't been a real couple for years. We lived in the same house, shared a life on paper, but emotionally we were just two strangers coexisting in the same space. I don't think I even realized how hollow I'd become until I walked out of that house and into this one." I just listened, not daring to interrupt. I could tell she needed to articulate these thoughts, to give them voice and make them real. "I came here yesterday because I couldn't stand the noise in my head anymore," she continued, "and now I don't want to go back. Not yet." And so she stayed for the entire day. We didn't create a formal plan. Her presence simply continued. I made us a simple breakfast of scrambled eggs and toast. She insisted on helping me sort my laundry, and we both laughed when she held up a single bright pink sock that had mysteriously infiltrated a load of my whites. In the afternoon, we went for a walk through the neighborhood, a slow, meandering loop under the now clearing sky. We didn't hold hands, but our shoulders brushed against each other a few times, a small, innocent contact that neither of us commented on. The day unfolded with a gentle, unforced rhythm. That evening I cooked dinner for us, a simple pasta dish with a fresh salad. Afterward, we found ourselves on the couch in the living room. She tucked her legs beneath her, nursing a cup of herbal tea. I sat next to her, maintaining a respectful but comforting closeness. A nature documentary played on the television, its sound a low murmur in the background, but neither of us was really paying attention. Then, in a quiet voice, she said, "It's strange. I feel a sense of peace here, like I'm allowed to just exist without any expectations. I haven't felt that in so long." I turned to look at her more fully. "You don't have to rush back to feeling anything else. There's no timeline for this." She looked up at me, her eyes searching mine for something. Permission, perhaps, or just understanding. "Do you think it's wrong that I don't feel bad about being here?" she asked again, the question still weighing on her. "No," I said gently. "I think you're finally doing what you need to do for yourself. There's nothing wrong with that." Her head slowly came to rest against my shoulder. I let her stay there, my arm naturally finding its way around her, not in a possessive or suggestive way, but just to be a steady presence. And then, in that quiet moment, the energy between us shifted. She lifted her head and looked up at me, our faces closer than they had ever been. Her gaze lingered on my lips for a beat. I could feel the warmth of her breath, and then slowly, with infinite hesitation, she leaned in. Her lips met mine, a touch so soft and careful it felt more like a question she wasn't sure she had the right to ask. We kissed for only a moment. There were no fireworks, no sudden passion, just a profound sense of connection. Two people finding a moment of solace from their own private pains. She pulled back, her eyes wide. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "You don't have to." "Be?" I replied, my voice just as quiet. We didn't kiss again. She leaned into me once more, this time resting her head against my chest, and we stayed that way for what felt like an hour, wrapped in a stillness that was both comforting and electric. Something had fundamentally changed, and though neither of us dared to say it out loud, we both knew it. At the time, I don't think I fully grasped how deep the bond between us had grown. In those first few days, we were just two people navigating the unexpected circumstances we'd been handed. But as the days turned into weeks, something about the simplicity of our shared moments, those quiet morning coffees, the easy conversations, the shared silence, began to feel like something much more substantial, something incredibly real. It wasn't a sudden or dramatic transformation. It was a gradual evolution that began after that quiet night when she had stayed over and we had shared that single hesitant kiss, a kiss that felt like a question neither of us was ready to answer. We didn't rush into anything afterward. In fact, for a few days we created a bit of space, both of us instinctively knowing we needed time to process what was happening. But the distance wasn't awkward. It was a natural pause, a mutual understanding that we were on delicate ground and needed to tread carefully. In the days that followed, Claire began the difficult process of confronting her life. She spent most of her time at her own house. She told me she couldn't just abandon it, that she needed to face it, to sort through the life she had built and the memories that were embedded in its walls. I understood completely. Yet, she still came over every single day. Sometimes it was just for a morning coffee, other times for a long talk in the afternoon. The suffocating pressure she'd been under was still a heavy presence in her life, but a quiet companionship was blossoming between us, one that didn't rely on grand romantic gestures or dramatic confessions. I would have coffee brewing when I heard her familiar soft knock, and we'd sit on my back deck sipping from our mugs while she shared her thoughts. There were days she cried, overwhelmed by the enormity of her decisions. And there were days she laughed, like when I tried to fix a wobbly leg on my kitchen table and ended up making it worse. I found myself smiling more than I had in years. Her presence was like a slow, steady sunrise in my own quiet life, bringing warmth and light I hadn't realized I was missing. In turn, I could see the changes in her. Her eyes, once clouded with a perpetual sadness, began to clear. They started to hold a spark of something new, resolve. Her smiles became more frequent, and her laughter, when it came, was freer and less hesitant. She started talking about her own passions, things she had loved before her identity had become so entangled with Richard's, painting, hiking, a love for old black and white films. I was witnessing her rediscover herself piece by piece. It was not a fast or easy process, but with every day we spent in each other's company, I could see her healing. Not from grief in the traditional sense, but from the slow erosion of her own spirit. And as time went on, I realized I was learning and healing alongside her. Then one Saturday, about a month later, she asked me to meet her for dinner. She chose a small, quiet Italian restaurant downtown. It felt significant. It was our first time meeting somewhere that wasn't one of our houses, our first time being out together in the world. As I drove to meet her, a knot of nerves tightened in my stomach. This felt different, like a deliberate step forward into something new. I brought a bottle of wine she liked. She had already gotten a table on a secluded patio surrounded by twinkling lights and climbing ivy. The evening air was warm, the kind of perfect night where the city's hum feels like a gentle lullaby. We didn't talk about anything heavy during dinner. The conversation flowed easily, as if we had been doing this for years. There was no pressure, no hidden agenda, just the soft clinking of silverware, the distant city sounds, and the easy way we would catch each other's eye and smile. As the night deepened and the sky turned to indigo, the soft glow from the patio lanterns cast a warm light between us. That's when she looked at me, her expression different from any I had seen before. The sadness was gone, as was the uncertainty. In its place was a calm, steady strength. "I think I'm ready," she said, her voice clear and even, breaking the comfortable silence. "Ready for what?" I asked, my heart skipping a beat, unsure of what she was about to say. "I'm ready to move forward for myself," she clarified. "I've been so stuck for so long, David. I felt like I was drowning, and I didn't know how to get to the surface. But being with you, you didn't save me, but you reminded me how to swim. You helped me see that it's okay to want more for myself, that I don't have to be defined by the life I almost let disappear." Her words landed with more force than I could have anticipated. I was silent for a moment, just looking at her. Then I reached across the table and took her hand in mine. It felt solid, natural. I didn't need to say anything. My touch conveyed all the support and pride I felt. She knew. And I knew too. She smiled, a real, radiant smile that lit up her entire face, and I was struck by just how far she had come in such a short time. This was no longer just about her escaping a bad situation. It was about her actively building a new, better one. "I've hired a lawyer," she continued, her grip tightening on my hand, "and I found a small apartment across town. I'm leaving, David. And when I picture my future now, my own future, you're in it. And that means more to me than I can say." It was my turn to smile, a wave of relief and happiness washing over me. "I don't need to rush anything either," I said softly. "We'll take it as slow as you need. But I want to be there with you, Claire. I think we both deserve to see where this goes." The silence that followed was not heavy or uncertain. It was filled with a profound and mutual understanding. There were no more questions, just a shared certainty that whatever was coming next, she would face it with newfound strength, and I would be there to support her. From that night on, everything was different, yet reassuringly the same. We didn't leap into a passionate, all-consuming romance. We didn't need to. We continued to take our time, enjoying the simple, quiet moments that had formed the foundation of our bond. As she navigated the complexities of her separation, we leaned on each other, our connection deepening with every passing day. We didn't rush, but slowly, we both came to realize that we had stumbled upon something rare and real, something worth protecting and nurturing. A few months later, long after she had settled into her own place in her new life, I often found myself waking up next to her. Ours wasn't the loud, chaotic love you read about in books. It was the steady, quiet, and true kind that's built on small gestures, shared laughter, and unwavering support. I was happy, truly happy, and so was she. And that was how I knew our story wasn't just about an ending. It was a story about a new beginning, about healing, and about the beautiful, unexpected gift of a second chance.